Sound of cicadas, a gentle splash. Sunlight glints off crystal-clear water. Arthur floats, eyes closed, a rare moment of peace. Then, a shadow falls. A sharp knock on the gate. "Mr. Vance, we need to talk about your illegal structure." His eyes snap open. Illegal? This pool. It had always been here. Always. A chill wind sweeps through the summer air. Arthur Vance loved his backyard. It was more than just a patch of grass and shrubs. It was a sanctuary, a living testament to decades of cherished memories. At its heart lay the pool, an azure jewel shimmering under the relentless summer sun. Its edges, worn smooth by countless hands and feet over the years, spoke of lazy afternoons, boisterous family gatherings, and quiet, contemplative mornings just like this one. He'd bought the house from his grandparents, inheriting not just the deed, but the very soul of the place. The pool, specifically, felt like an extension of his own history, a deep, cool breath in the urban sprawl. He ran a hand through the water, the familiar coolness seeping into his skin, pushing away the lingering anxieties of work, the low hum of the city. The sharp, insistent rap on his side gate shattered the tranquility like a stone dropped into glass. It wasn't the delivery man. It wasn't a neighbor looking for a forgotten ball. This knock had an official cadence, a kind of aggressive certainty. Arthur sighed, pushing himself off the pool's edge, water sluicing down his body. He pulled on a pair of old denim shorts and walked around the house, a faint sense of unease prickling at the back of his neck. Standing on his porch, a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, was a woman he vaguely recognized from the last Homeowners Association meeting. Brenda Sterling, he recalled, the new, impossibly rigid director of community compliance. She wore a tailored pantsuit that looked far too formal for a Tuesday morning in July, her blonde hair pulled back, in a severe, unyielding ponytail. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over his property with clinical detachment, lingering for a fraction too long on the glint of blue from his backyard. "Mr. Vance?" Her voice was crisp, devoid of warmth, like the snap of a fresh banknote. "Brenda Sterling, HOA Community Compliance. Do you have a moment?" Arthur wiped a hand across his wet forehead. "Miss Sterling, what can I do for you?" He tried to keep his tone cordial, but the unease was growing. She hadn't bothered with pleasantries. "I'm here regarding a discrepancy we've identified with your property, specifically parcel 4B7. We have received and subsequently verified a report concerning an unauthorized structure on your lot." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, her gaze unwavering. Arthur frowned. Unauthorized structure? His mind raced, cataloging every shed, every fence post, every garden gnome. "I'm not sure what you mean. Everything on my property has been here for years, well before I even moved in." Brenda Sterling's lips thinned, a faint, almost imperceptible twitch. "Yes, well, that's precisely the issue, Mr. Vance. Our records indicate that your backyard swimming pool, to be exact, does not have the necessary permits on file with the HOA, nor does it appear to comply with current zoning regulations as outlined in our updated covenants, Article 7, subsection C." The words hit Arthur like a cold wave. His pool? Illegal? He almost laughed, but the humor caught in his throat. "My pool? Ms. Sterling, that pool has been here since before I was born. My grandfather built it in, I don't know, the early 70s? It's practically an antique." Brenda's expression remained as unreadable as polished stone. "Date of construction is irrelevant, Mr. Vance. What is relevant is compliance with current HOA bylaws. All structures, regardless of age, must have proper documentation and meet current safety and aesthetic standards. We performed an aerial survey last week, and your pool, it simply doesn't appear on any of our approved schematics for your property. Furthermore, its proximity to your property line is in clear violation of the 5-foot setback rule." "The setback rule?" Arthur's voice rose slightly, disbelief battling with a rising tide of indignation. Ms. Sterling, this house was built in 1968. The pool went in 2, maybe 3 years later. The HOA wasn't even a twinkle in anyone's eye then. This neighborhood was just fields and a few scattered houses when my grandfather put that pool in. The Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association was formally established in 1985, Brenda recited, as if reading from a manual. Any property within its designated boundaries, regardless of when individual structures were erected, became subject to its regulations upon its inception. Ignorance of the bylaws is not an excuse for non-compliance. She tapped the clipboard. I have here a formal notice of violation, along with a provisional fine of $500, effective immediately. You have 30 days, Mr. Vance, to either provide proof of proper permitting and compliance with current standards, which frankly, given the observed infractions, is highly unlikely, or submit a plan for the pool's immediate removal. Removal. The word echoed in Arthur's mind, cold and sharp. Removal. His grandfather's pool. The very thought made his stomach clench. Removal? Are you serious? This is absurd. I pay my dues. I keep my yard immaculate. My pool isn't causing anyone any harm. It is an unregistered, non-compliant structure, Brenda stated, her voice as flat and unyielding as concrete. And as such, it poses a liability to the association and a potential nuisance to your neighbors. The bylaws are clear, Mr. Vance. Article 7, subsection C, requires all in-ground pools to be approved by the Architectural Review Board and meet current safety fencing and setback requirements. Your pool lacks the required 5-foot setback from the property line and appears to predate any documented approval. Arthur stared at her, anger beginning to simmer beneath his initial shock. This wasn't just about a pool. It was about an encroachment, an assault on his home, his personal history. This is bureaucratic overreach, Miss Sterling. My grandfather built this house, built this pool. He lived here for 50 years without a single complaint from any homeowners. Association. Times change, Mr. Vance. Regulations evolve. Our role is to maintain property values and ensure a consistent aesthetic and safety standard throughout Willow Creek Estates. Your pool, as it stands, falls outside those parameters. She extended a neatly folded white envelope. Here is the official notice. It details the specific violations, the required actions, and the appeal process should you choose to pursue it. However, I advise you to consider the costs of fighting this, Mr. Vance. Compliance is always the easier path. Arthur took the envelope, his fingers almost crushing the paper. He could feel the heat rising in his face. This is ridiculous. You're going to fine me and demand I tear out a pool that's been here for over 50 years? What about common sense? Common sense, Mr. Vance, is subjective. The bylaws are not. They are the agreed-upon rules of this community. Good day. With that, Brenda Sterling turned on her heel, her tailored suit crisp as she marched off his porch, and down the driveway, her posture radiating an air of untouchable authority. Her black sedan, a sleek, impersonal vehicle, was gone in moments, leaving Arthur standing alone, the hum of the cicadas now feeling like a mocking laugh. He ripped open the envelope. The legalese inside was dense, impenetrable. Fine, $500. Deadline. For compliance or appeal, 30 days. Consequences of non-compliance, further fines, legal action, forced removal at his expense. It was a declaration of war, delivered with the sterile precision of a legal brief. Arthur retreated into his house, the cool air inside doing little to calm the fire in his gut. He went straight to the dusty, unfinished basement, to the old cedar chest where his grandfather had kept all his important papers. Deeds, insurance policies, old tax returns, faded photographs, a lifetime of accumulated bureaucracy and memories. He needed to find something, anything that proved the pool's legality. A permit, a blueprint, an old inspection report. Something that predated 1985. Something that made Brenda Sterling's claim sound as foolish as it felt. Hours blurred into a haze of paper dust and mounting frustration. He pulled out boxes, sifting through yellowed documents. The house deed was clear. 1968. Grandfather's name, then his father's, then his. But nothing, absolutely nothing, about the pool. No blueprints, no construction permits, no receipts from a pool contractor. It was as if the pool had simply materialized out of thin air. How could that be? His grandfather was meticulous. Every receipt, every warranty, every instruction manual, they were all here, for everything else. But not the pool. His phone buzzed. It was his best friend, Liam, a lawyer specializing in property law. "Hey man, what's up? You sounded a little tense when you called." "Tense? Liam, the HOA just declared my backyard pool illegal. They want me to tear it out or face massive fines." Arthur paced his living room, the phone pressed to his ear. "Your pool? The one that's older than dirt?" Liam sounded genuinely shocked. "That's ridiculous. What's their beef?" "No permits on file, doesn't meet current setback rules. Apparently, it's an unauthorized structure despite being older than their entire association. This new compliance director, Brenda Sterling, she's a pit bull." Liam was quiet for a moment. Look, technically, if they established bylaws in '85 and your pool was there before, it might be grandfathered in. But that depends entirely on the specific language in their original covenants. Most HOAs have clauses for pre-existing structures, but some newer ones try to... The old newspaper, fragile and yellowed, felt like a shield in Arthur's hand, a tangible defiance against Brenda Sterling's sterile accusations. The dates, August 12, 1973 and June 5, 1973, blazed in his mind like beacons. 12 years. 12 years before Brenda's precious HOA existed, his grandfather, Robert Vance, had poured concrete and dreams into this backyard, creating the first-of-its-kind pool in Willow Creek. This wasn't just a pool. It was a cornerstone of the community's nascent history. A grim satisfaction settled over him, replacing the earlier panic. He wasn't just defending his property, he was defending his family's legacy, a piece of local heritage Brenda Sterling, with her clipped tones and bureaucratic zeal, seemed determined to erase. The fight had just escalated from a minor nuisance to a full-blown crusade. The next morning, armed with the newspapers, Arthur called Liam. "You won't believe what I found." He practically shouted into the phone, his voice vibrating with suppressed excitement. He recounted the discovery, the new backyard oasis and first-of-its-kind articles. Liam whistled. "Well, that's a game-changer, Art. Proof of existence and construction date, explicitly stating your grandfather, that's gold. It makes their unauthorized structure claim look pretty weak. It also puts the burden back on them to prove their bylaws supersede pre-existing documented structures. So, what's the next step? Do I just send this to Brenda and tell her to shove it?" Arthur grinned, picturing Brenda's unyielding face as she read the dates. "Not quite. We need to play this smart. First, we need to verify the authenticity of those newspaper articles. While highly likely genuine, the HOA could claim they're fakes or local curiosities without official weight. We need official corroboration. Go to the local library, check their archives. They often have microfiche or digital scans of old newspapers. Get a certified copy if you can. Then we need to officially file an appeal with the HOA citing this new evidence. Don't engage with Brenda directly beyond the appeal process. Let the paperwork do the talking for now. We want to box her in legally, not get into a shouting match. And the $500 fine? Hold off on paying it. Once we appeal, that fine should be stayed until the appeal is resolved. If they press, we can argue it's an undue burden while the legality is under dispute. But don't make it the main fight yet. Focus on the core issue, the pool's legal status. Arthur spent the rest of the day at the Willow Creek Public Library. The librarian, a kindly woman with spectacles perched on her nose, was intrigued by his quest. She guided him to the dusty microfiche readers, a relic of a bygone era. Scrolling through the grainy images, Arthur found the exact editions of the Willow Creek Gazette. The headlines, the ads, the small articles about his grandfather's pool, they were all there, perfectly preserved. The librarian helped him print out certified copies, each stamped with the library's official seal and a date. The tangible proof felt even more substantial now. He returned home, the certified copies spread out on his dining room table. He also printed out Article 7, subsection C of the HOA bylaws from their website, circling the phrases approved by the Architectural Review Board and 5-foot setback. He then compared it to the rough sketches his grandfather had drawn in an old ledger, not official blueprints, but detailed enough to show the pool's dimensions and its proximity to the property lines. It was indeed closer than 5 feet in some sections. This was the chink in his armor, the one point where Brenda might have a technical leg to stand on, even if the pool predated the rule. The next morning, Arthur drafted his appeal letter. He wrote it carefully, adhering to Liam's advice to keep it formal and factual. He enclosed the certified newspaper articles, citing the dates and specific mentions of the pool's construction by Robert Vance. He argued that the pool, being a pre-existing structure established more than a decade before the HOA's formation, should be grandfathered in and exempt from retroactive application of new bylaws, especially those concerning setback rules that were not in place at the time of construction. He politely requested the immediate withdrawal of the violation notice and the $500 fine. He mailed the appeal letter via certified mail, return receipt requested, to the HOA's official address. The waiting began. Days turned into a week. Arthur tried to go about his routine, but an undercurrent of tension hummed beneath the surface. He swam in his illegal pool, feeling a new kind of defiant joy with every stroke. He imagined Brenda Sterling receiving the letter, her rigid posture faltering, her carefully constructed arguments crumbling. Then, the return receipt arrived, signed by B. Sterling. Arthur felt a surge of satisfaction. She had it. Now the ball was in her court. A few days later, a crisp white envelope with the HOA's logo arrived. Arthur tore it open, his heart pounding. It wasn't a withdrawal of the notice. It was a letter scheduling an ad hoc review board meeting for his appeal to be held in 2 weeks at the community clubhouse. And the members of the board would include Brenda Sterling herself, along with 2 other HOA board members. "They're not backing down," Arthur told Liam over the phone. "They're making me go through the full appeal process, and Brenda's on the board." "Expected," Liam said. "They're trying to wear you down, make you give up. This is where most people fold. But you have strong evidence, Art. You need to present it clearly, calmly. Don't let her bait you. Stick to the facts, dates, documented existence, grandfathering clause arguments. I'll help you prepare. Can you get me a copy of the original 1985 HOA covenants? That's key. Their current ones might have been amended to close loopholes." Retrieving. The original covenants proved to be more challenging. The HOA office claimed they only had the most recent version on file. The city records department was a labyrinth of bureaucracy. After several frustrating phone calls and a visit that led to a dead end, Arthur felt a familiar despair creeping back in. Without the original document, his grandfathering argument, while supported by the newspaper, could be dismissed as merely speculative. In the meantime, the atmosphere in the neighborhood seemed to shift, subtly but perceptibly. He noticed more. Glances, hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when he walked by. He saw Brenda Sterling driving slowly past his house more often, her gaze lingering. It felt like he was under surveillance. One afternoon, while he was watering his front lawn, his next-door neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a sweet, elderly woman who had known his grandparents, timidly approached him. "Arthur, dear, I heard about your pool." It's just awful what they're doing." Her voice was soft, laced with sympathy. "It is, Mrs. Henderson. They're trying to tell me it's illegal." She wrung her hands. "Well, I wouldn't worry too much. Everyone knows that pool's been here forever. My Albert used to swim in it when he was a boy, and he's 65 now." She paused, then lowered her voice. "It's that Brenda Sterling. She's been causing a lot of trouble since she moved in, trying to change everything. She even sent a letter about my rose bushes being too tall." Arthur felt a flicker of solidarity. "She sent you a letter about your roses?" "Oh, yes. And the Millers down the street, she told them their bird feeder was attracting undesirable wildlife. She's on a mission, that one. But don't you worry, dear. Your grandfather, Robert, he was a good man. He did things properly. I remember when he built that pool. It was quite the sensation." She leaned closer, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "He got special permission from the township, you know. Back before all these fancy rules. They even came out to inspect it. It was a very big deal. Special permission from the township." The words resonated with Arthur. If his grandfather got official township approval, that would trump any later HOA bylaws. That would be the ultimate trump card. "Mrs. Henderson, do you remember anything else about that? Any specific documents or who he talked to?" "Oh, it was so long ago, dear. But I'm sure he would have kept all that paperwork. Robert was meticulous. Maybe in those old boxes." "He kept? In the basement?" She patted his arm, then shuffled back to her own porch. Arthur felt a renewed surge of hope. He'd gone through the cedar chest, but maybe he'd missed something. Maybe it wasn't a permit in the modern sense, but some old certificate of occupancy or a letter of approval from the township. He went back to the basement, this time with a more focused mission. He remembered his grandfather had an old, heavy-duty metal filing cabinet in a corner, usually locked. Arthur had never paid it much mind, assuming it held old business records. He found the key hanging on a nail above the workbench, almost hidden by cobwebs. The cabinet groaned as he pulled open the top drawer. Inside, neat stacks of yellowed folders labeled in his grandfather's precise hand. Business accounts, taxes 1970-1975, property deeds. And then a thick green folder at the very back. Pool. His heart hammered. This was it. He pulled out the folder, dust motes dancing in the dim light. Inside, dated letters on official township letterhead, detailed schematics, inspection reports, and, most importantly, a document titled Certificate of Occupancy and Structural Approval, Residential In-Ground Pool, dated July 15, 1973. It bore the faded signature of a township building inspector and a dusty official seal. His grandfather hadn't just built the pool. He had gone through the proper channels of the time, securing full township approval. This wasn't just a local newspaper. Clipping. The Willow Creek Community Clubhouse was usually a place of cheerful gatherings, potlucks, and kids' birthday parties. Today, however, it felt like a courtroom. The air was thick with a palpable tension, far heavier than the summer humidity outside. Arthur walked in, his certified newspaper articles and the precious certificate of occupancy clutched in a worn leather brief Liam had lent him. He was early, as advised, and took a seat at the single table facing the 3 chairs arranged for the ad hoc review board. His heart hammered, a mix of anxiety and thrilling anticipation. Brenda Sterling arrived precisely on time. Her presence, as sharp and uncompromising as ever. She swept in, clipboard in hand, her gaze flicking over Arthur with a dismissive air before settling on the chairs behind the long, polished oak table. She was flanked by 2 other board members, Mr. Harrison, a balding man with tired eyes who owned the local hardware store, and Mrs. Davison, a stern-faced woman with tightly permed hair, known for her meticulously manicured rose garden and, perhaps, Arthur mused, a recent letter from Brenda about its excessive height. Neither offered Arthur a glance or a greeting. "Good evening, Mr. Vance," Brenda began, her voice crisp and formal, entirely devoid of the previous day's conversational edge. "Thank you for attending this ad hoc review board meeting regarding the violation notice issued for your property. Parcel 4B7. She did not ask him to sit, assuming he would remain standing. Arthur remained standing, but leaned casually against the chair, a small act of defiance. She settled into the middle seat, Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Davison taking their places on either side. Mr. Harrison looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. Mrs. Davison, however, fixed Arthur with a stare that suggested he was already guilty. "As you know," Brenda continued, addressing the other board members more than Arthur, "Mr. Vance has filed an appeal concerning the unauthorized in-ground swimming pool on his property. Our records indicate no permit or approval for this structure, and aerial surveys show it violates the established setback regulations as outlined in Article 7, subsection C of our current bylaws." She gestured towards a large laminated map of Willow Creek Estates displayed on an easel beside her, with Arthur's property highlighted in red. A small red X marked the location of his pool. Arthur felt a flicker of anger at the deliberate framing, the presumption of guilt. He held his tongue, remembering Liam's advice. Let her lay out her case, then dismantle it. "Mr. Vance," you stated, "in your appeal letter that the pool predates the formation of the HOA, Brenda said, turning her attention back to him, a hint of patronizing skepticism in her tone. "While we acknowledge that the association was formally established in 1985, all properties within its boundaries are subject to the covenants. Pre-existing structures are generally expected to come into compliance over time or through an exception, process neither of which has occurred for your pool." She paused, as if expecting him to capitulate. Arthur remained silent, letting her continue. "Furthermore," she pressed on, "even if we were to consider a grandfathering argument, which the current bylaws do not explicitly accommodate for structures of this nature without prior documented approval, the absence of any permits or official construction records makes it impossible for us to verify the pool's safety or structural integrity. This is a significant liability for the association and a potential hazard to the community." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp. "Do you have any new evidence, Mr. Vance, beyond the newspaper clippings you submitted that would substantiate your claim of the pool's legal origin or compliance?" This was it. The trap was set, the question posed. Arthur reached into his brief. "Yes, Miss Sterling, I do. And with all due respect, those newspaper clippings aren't just curiosities, they are historical documentation." He pulled out the certified copies of the Willow Creek Gazette. These are certified copies from the Willow Creek Public Library, showing articles dated June 5th and August 12th, 1973. Both explicitly mention the construction of the swimming pool at the Vance residence by my grandfather, Robert Vance, noting, "It as the first of its kind in the burgeoning Willow Creek community." He laid the copies carefully on the table in front of Brenda. Brenda's eyes narrowed slightly as she glanced at them, a flicker of annoyance in her otherwise composed expression. Mr. Harrison picked up one of the copies, his tired eyes scanning the article with a hint of curiosity. Mrs. Davison sniffed disdainfully. "Newspaper articles, Mr. Vance, while perhaps charming, are not official permits or legal documents," Brenda stated, her voice still smooth, but with a barely perceptible hardening. "They provide anecdotal evidence at best. We require official municipal records, blueprints, permits, documentation that proves this structure was built to code and was approved by the relevant authorities at the time. Do you have any such documents?" Arthur met her gaze, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. This was the moment. "As a matter of fact, Miss Sterling, I do." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the words hang in the air, allowing a sliver of triumph to show in his eyes. He then slowly, deliberately, pulled the green folder from his brief. He opened it, revealing the neatly organized yellow documents within. First, he extracted the detailed, hand-drawn schematics, laying them out on the table. They clearly showed the pool's dimensions and its exact placement on the property, including its proximity to the property line. "These are my grandfather's original schematics," Arthur explained, his voice calm, clear, and resonant in the quiet room. "As you can see, they detail the precise location and size of the pool." He then carefully removed the crowning jewel, the Certificate of Occupancy and Structural Approval, Residential In-Ground Pool, dated July 15, 1973. He laid it directly in front of Brenda, the faded ink and official seal stark against the polished wood. "And this, Ms. Sterling, is a Certificate of Occupancy and Structural Approval for the pool, issued by the Willow Creek Township, dated July 15, 1973. It bears the official seal of the township and the signature of the building inspector, at the time, a Mr. Walter Reed. This document certifies that the pool was inspected and approved for use in full compliance with all township regulations and building codes in effect at the time of its construction." The clubhouse was silent. Brenda Sterling's composure, usually ironclad, wavered for the first time. Her eyes, which had been so quick to dismiss, now fixated on the certificate. She picked it up, her fingers perhaps a fraction less steady than usual, and examined it closely. Her brow furrowed, a tiny muscle twitching in her jaw. She flipped it over, then back again, as if searching for a trick, a hidden clause, a sign of forgery. But the document was old, legitimate, and undeniably official. Mr. Harrison leaned forward, his face creased with genuine interest now. He reached for the document, and Brenda, after a moment's hesitation, passed it to him. He put on his reading glasses and scrutinized it. A faint smile touched his lips. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, almost to himself. Old Walter Reed. He was the chief inspector back then, solid as a rock. Mrs. Davison, initially still stern, peered over Mr. Harrison's shoulder. Her expression slowly morphed from skepticism to grudging recognition, then to a hint of surprise. "As you can see," Arthur continued, pressing his advantage, his voice gaining confidence with every word, "this pool was not only documented in local news as a significant community feature, but it also received full governmental approval from the township a full 12 years before the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association was even established. It was built to the standards and regulations of its era, and it was officially certified as such." He pointed to Brenda's laminated map. "The setback rule you cite, Article 7, subsection C, was enacted by the HOA years later. My pool, having been legally constructed and approved by the governing municipal authority at the time, is clearly grandfathered in. To demand its removal or compliance with rules that did not exist when it was built is, frankly, an overreach of your authority and an attempt at retroactive enforcement that has no legal standing." Brenda retrieved the certificate, placing it back on the table. She cleared her throat, her gaze now meeting Arthur's, but her eyes held a new, unaccustomed light, a mix of surprise, frustration, and perhaps a grudging respect. "This is certainly a new development, Mr. Vance," she admitted, her voice losing some of its earlier certainty. "This document appears to be legitimate." "It is legitimate, Ms. Sterling," Arthur affirmed, his gaze unwavering. "And it proves definitively that my pool is not an unauthorized structure. It is a historically documented, legally approved part of my property, and by extension, a part of this community's history." Mr. Harrison nodded slowly. "Arthur's right, Brenda. This kind of official township approval, that trumps our bylaws, especially if it's from before we even existed. We can't retroactively apply rules like that. That's a quick way to get us sued, and frankly, we'd lose." Mrs. Davison, after a moment of contemplation, surprisingly chimed in. "My Albert said he remembered Mr. Vance getting something from the township for it. He was a very proper man, Robert Vance, always by the book." Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line. she was cornered. Her usual tactic of dismissive authority was rendered useless by the undeniable weight of the official document. She glanced at the other. The 14 business days dragged by for Arthur, each one feeling longer than the last. He tried to focus on his work, on maintaining his peaceful backyard, but an underlying current of anxiety persisted. He knew Brenda Sterling wouldn't simply concede. The silence from the HOA office was almost more unsettling than her initial violation notice. It felt like the calm before a storm. Finally, the letter arrived. The HOA logo on the envelope seemed to sneer at him. Arthur ripped it open, his hands trembling slightly. The formal language within was chillingly precise. The ad hoc review board, after consulting with legal counsel and reviewing the submitted certificate of occupancy and structural approval, acknowledged the document's authenticity and its implications. Regarding the pool's initial construction, they confirmed that the pool was indeed grandfathered in concerning its original township approval and would therefore not be subject to retroactive application of the HOA's setback rules. A wave of relief washed over Arthur, momentarily dizzying him. He had won. He had actually won. But then his eyes scanned further down the page. The relief evaporated, replaced by a cold knot in his stomach. The letter wasn't a full victory. It was a tactical retreat designed to trap him. However, the letter continued, the board's legal counsel has advised that while the initial construction may be grandfathered, the pool's current operational status, safety features, and ongoing maintenance remain subject to contemporary HOA and municipal safety standards, specifically Article 7, subsection D, which mandates that all in-ground pools must be enclosed by a fence or barrier at least 4 feet high with self-latching gates to prevent unauthorized access and ensure child safety. Our recent aerial survey and subsequent on-site observation indicate that your pool currently lacks a compliant safety barrier. The letter went on to detail the new violation: failure to comply with current safety fencing requirements. A new provisional fine of $750 was levied, significantly higher than the first. He had 30 days to install a compliant fence or face further penalties, including legal action and forced installation at his expense. Arthur crumpled the letter in his hand. Brenda. Of course. She had conceded the battle, but immediately launched a new, more insidious war. She couldn't fight the pool's existence, so she was attacking its present state. He did have a fence, a charming, low picket fence around his yard, but it was certainly not 4 feet high and didn't have a self-latching gate specifically for the pool area. It was an old-fashioned boundary, not a modern safety barrier. He called Liam, his voice tight with frustration. She hit me again, Liam. Different angle. Says my pool fence isn't up to code. Another violation, another fine, more demands. Liam listened, then sighed. Damn it. I figured she'd pivot. This is a common tactic. If they can't invalidate the structure, they go after current safety or maintenance standards. And frankly, Art, they probably have a stronger legal leg to stand on here. Child safety regulations are serious, and HOAs usually have pretty clear bylaws on pool fencing. It's much harder to argue grandfathering against current safety standards that protect lives, especially if the original township approval didn't specify ongoing safety features like modern fencing. So I have to tear down my existing fence and put up some ugly chain-link monstrosity? Arthur felt a wave of despair. His low picket fence, covered in climbing roses, was part of the charm of his backyard. Not necessarily chain-link. But it has to be a 4-foot barrier, non-climbable, with a self-latching, self-closing gate. You have options for materials: wrought iron, glass, wood panels. But yes, you'll need a proper pool-specific safety fence. And fast, if you want, to avoid the fines. The next few days were a whirlwind of angry research and frantic phone calls. Arthur discovered that compliant pool fencing was expensive. He got quotes, ranging from $5,000 to $10,000 depending on the material. and installation. The cost felt like a punitive measure, another layer of Brenda Sterling's petty tyranny. He drove past Brenda Sterling's house one evening, a sleek, modern structure with not a single blade of grass out of place. No pool, of course. Her perfection felt like a direct indictment of his lived-in, imperfect home. He imagined her smug satisfaction, having found a new angle of attack, a loophole to exploit. The community atmosphere grew even more strained. The HOA letter detailing his grandfathered pool but new safety violation had been sent to all residents. A subtle smear campaign. People looked at him with a mix of pity and suspicion. Some neighbors, particularly those with young children, started giving him wider berth, their eyes drifting to his backyard. The accusation, however veiled, was clear. Arthur Vance was a safety hazard. One afternoon, a small group of children, no older than 7 or 8, walked past his house, loudly discussing a recent drowning accident they'd seen on the news. Arthur heard fragments of their conversation. "Dangerous, Mommy says," and "What if someone falls in?" His stomach churned. Brenda was painting him as irresponsible, a threat to the neighborhood. This wasn't just about money or bureaucracy anymore. This was about his reputation, his standing in the community, and the sanctity of his home. He had played by the rules of the past, but Brenda was using the rules of the present to systematically dismantle his peace. He considered his options. He could install the fence, bite the bullet, and end the conflict. It would be a financial hit and a compromise to the aesthetic he loved, but it would be over. Or he could fight. But how? This safety argument felt ironclad. He spent hours, online, researching pool safety regulations, HOA laws, and legal precedents. He found countless cases where HOAs successfully enforced safety upgrades on older properties. It felt like a losing battle. One evening, while pacing his living room, a thought sparked. Safety, child safety. This was Brenda's new moral high ground. But what if the real danger wasn't his pool, but something else? Something the HOA, in its meticulous focus on aesthetics and rule following, might be overlooking. He remembered Mr. Harrison's uncomfortable demeanor at the board meeting and Mrs. Davison's unexpected support. They weren't as ideologically aligned with Brenda as she might have wished. There had to be other residents, long-time residents, who felt the sting of Brenda's rigid enforcement. The next morning, Arthur drove to the local elementary school, timing his visit for student pickup. He watched the organized chaos, the parents greeting their children. He noticed the bus stop, where children waited for the school bus, often unsupervised for a few minutes before the bus arrived. He also noticed something else. The route the children took to the bus stop. Many walked along a stretch of sidewalk that bordered Willow Creek, the actual creek that gave the community its name. The creek, usually a gentle murmur, was particularly high after a recent heavy rainfall. Its banks, especially where the concrete retaining wall had crumbled in places, were steep and muddy. There were no fences, no warning signs, just a natural barrier that, in places, was clearly insufficient for a child playing too close to the edge. He saw a couple of kids, backpacks slung low, dare each other to get closer to the rushing water. A chilling thought struck him. The HOA was obsessed with his perfectly maintained, if unfenced, pool. But a dangerous, open waterway, a natural hazard that children walked by daily on their way to school, seemed to be entirely ignored. He drove home, a new cold determination setting in. He wouldn't just defend his pool, he would expose the HOA's hypocrisy. Brenda Sterling wanted to talk about safety? He would show her true safety concerns. He would turn her own weapon against her, forcing her to confront a far more significant and potentially deadly liability. The new fine, the pressure, the public shaming, it all fueled a fire in him, not of despair, but of righteous indignation. Brenda Sterling had pushed him into a corner, but he was about to prove that a cornered man could be the most dangerous opponent of all. He wasn't just fighting for his pool anymore. He was fighting for the real safety of the entire community, and Brenda Sterling was about to find out just how deeply he was willing to dig to expose her blind spots. This was no longer just about his backyard. It was about the entire foundation of Willow Creek Estates and the secrets it held. Arthur Vance spent the next week meticulously documenting the true safety hazard of Willow Creek. He walked the length of the creek's accessible banks, particularly those sections bordering common areas and residential paths. He took dozens of photographs, crumbling retaining walls, steep, muddy slopes leading directly to the water, overgrown brush concealing drop-offs, and clear paths worn by children's shoes leading dangerously close to the flowing water. He even found discarded toys near the unstable edges, stark reminders of potential tragedy. He consulted city planning maps, discovering that sections of the creek, especially near the school bus stop, were indeed within HOA common property or easements, making them the HOA's responsibility to maintain. He spoke discreetly with a few more longtime residents, who all echoed Mrs. Henderson's sentiment about Brenda Sterling's overzealous enforcement, and many expressed quiet concern about the creek, a concern that had previously seemed too abstract to address. Armed with his damning visual evidence and a newfound strategic clarity, Arthur called Liam. "I have a new plan. Brenda wants to talk about safety? Let's talk about real safety. The creek." Liam listened, a slow smile spreading across his face. Brilliant, Art. Utterly brilliant. It turns their own weapon against them. This isn't just about your pool anymore. It's about holding them accountable for actual negligence. You've got them. We need to present this at the next full HOA board meeting publicly to maximize the impact and get the community on your side. The quarterly HOA general meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Arthur arrived early, carrying not a brief, but a large, discreetly rolled poster board and his laptop. The community clubhouse was packed, far more so than usual. Word had clearly spread about the ongoing saga of Arthur's pool, and the new safety violation notice had stirred a quiet unease among residents. Many were curious, some openly skeptical of Brenda Sterling's increasingly stringent rules. Brenda sat at the head of the long table, flanked by Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Davison, and two other board members. Her posture was as rigid as ever, but Arthur noticed a slight tension around her eyes, a faint flush on her cheeks. She began the meeting with standard announcements, then moved to new business. And finally, Brenda announced, her voice adopting a slightly self-righteous tone, "We have the matter of Mr. Vance's property. While the board has agreed to grandfather his pool regarding its original construction, a new violation notice has been issued for non-compliance with current safety fencing regulations. Mr. Vance has been given 30 days to install a compliant fence around his pool." She looked directly at Arthur, a hint of challenge in her eyes. "Mr. Vance, do you have anything to add regarding this matter?" Arthur stood, calmly walking to the front of the room. He didn't address Brenda directly. Instead, he faced the assembled residents. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Arthur Vance, and I live at 4B7. You've probably heard about the ongoing issue with my backyard pool." A murmur went through the crowd. "The HOA, specifically Ms. Sterling, has accused my pool of being an illegal structure, and then a safety hazard due to its lack of a modern safety fence." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And while I understand the importance of safety, especially child safety, I believe the HOA, under its current leadership, is focusing on the wrong hazards." He unrolled his poster board. It was a large, blown-up photograph of the crumbling creek bank near the elementary school bus stop, a child's brightly colored ball half submerged in the rushing water just below the precarious edge. Gasps rippled through the room. "This is Willow Creek," Arthur stated, his voice clear and resonating. Specifically, a section many of our children walk past every single school day on HOA common property just a few yards from their bus stop. He clicked a button on his laptop, projecting more of his photographs onto a screen behind him. Children playing dangerously close to the unfenced water. Sections where the bank had eroded significantly. Muddy footprints leading right to the edge. While the HOA is demanding I spend thousands of dollars on a new fence for a pool that has existed safely for over 50 years, a pool that is on my private property and under constant adult supervision when in use, they have chosen to completely ignore a very real, very present, and very dangerous threat to all our children in a public area on their property. He turned to Brenda, his gaze piercing. Ms. Sterling, you spoke of liability and potential hazard to the community concerning my pool. What about the actual, undeniable liability of an unfenced, eroding creek bank that children traverse daily? What about the potential for a real tragedy here, right within our community, that the HOA has neglected? Brenda's face had gone pale, her usual composure utterly shattered. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Mr. Harrison looked visibly uncomfortable, avoiding her eye. Mrs. Davison, however, leaned forward, her eyes wide with concern, then narrowed on Brenda. My son walks there every day. A woman from the back of the room called out, her voice trembling. I always worried about that creek. Another resident spoke up. He's right. My daughter almost slipped down that bank last week. Where are the fences there? The warning signs? The room erupted. Parents expressed outrage, concern, and a growing sense of betrayal. The focus had completely shifted from Arthur's pool to the HOA's glaring oversight. Brenda Sterling, who prided herself on control, had completely lost it. She banged her gavel feebly, but the shouts drowned her out. This is outrageous, she finally managed, her voice strained and thin. Mr. Vance is attempting to deflect from his own non-compliance with a sensationalized distraction. The creek is a natural feature, not a man-made structure. A natural feature that runs through your common property and poses a direct threat to children, Arthur countered, his voice steady. And one that the HOA, as the managing body of this community, has a clear responsibility to address. You can't selectively apply safety regulations, Ms. Sterling, not when lives are at stake. Mr. Harrison, seeing the mood of the room, cleared his throat loudly. Brenda, I think Mr. Vance has a point. We've received informal complaints about that creek for years. It's a genuine safety concern and we need to address it. Urgently. Mrs. Davison nodded vigorously. Indeed. My Albert almost fell in there, once as a boy. If safety is our priority, then it must be applied consistently. The children are paramount. The tide had irrevocably turned. Brenda Sterling, the meticulous enforcer of rules, was now exposed as a selective authoritarian, prioritizing petty aesthetic violations over real dangers. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled under the weight of public indignation and the undeniable evidence. Later that week, a special emergency HOA board meeting was called. Arthur was not present, but he heard the details from a sheepish Mr. Harrison, who called him later that evening. The pressure from the community, fueled by Arthur's presentation, had been immense. The board had voted in a rare, unanimous decision to prioritize immediate action on the creek. Funds were reallocated, contractors were being called, and the plans for proper fencing and stabilization along the dangerous sections of Willow Creek were fast-tracked. And as for Brenda Sterling, her position as Community Compliance Director was re-evaluated. She was stripped of her compliance duties, and a new, more community-oriented approach to bylaws was promised. Her rigid, unyielding reign had ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet, embarrassing realization that her strict adherence to superficial rules had blinded her to a far greater and potentially tragic truth. The irony was palpable. In her relentless pursuit of an illegal pool, she had inadvertently shone a spotlight on the HOA's own dangerous negligence. Arthur's pool remained, A beloved fixture, safe and sound, its age now a badge of honor, a symbol of a community that had finally learned to look beyond the surface, thanks to the man who dared to challenge the rules. Arthur not only saved his pool, but also exposed the HOA's dangerous oversight, leading to a significant shift in the community's priorities and Brenda Sterling's loss of authority. Did you enjoy the story? Let me know if you'd like to explore another dramatic